Family movie nights are always entertaining. Cramming 9 people onto a tiny second-hand couch and eating unbuttered popcorn, in service to my mom's emphasis on healthy eating, is an event I love. But last summer, my family decided to watch The Social Dilemma, a documentary covering the terrible state of the communication world and social media specifically. The documentary describes social media as controlling those using it, in large part because what you look at on social media often dictates what you are shown next. As the documentary ended and as the screen went black, I could see myself reflected in it. A short college freshman with rumpled hair, a crumpled hoodie, and a media and communications major in the making. As a media and communications major, I could see my potential to fall into the ethical dilemmas the documentary suggested would be unavoidable in the status quo. And I knew I would be using social media, which the documentary critiqued harshly. Ultimately, the documentary described my field as manipulative and without hope. I'm sure we've all heard rhetoric like the social dilemma. So, how many people here trust the media? I can't really see too many hands, but if your hand's not up, you're in good company. In a recent class activity, my professor asked which invention we would erase off the surface of the world if we could. Around 10 people responded that social media should be eliminated. No other invention received that many votes. In fact, Pew Research reported that the current analysis, based on a survey of 12,043 US adults, finds that both Democrats and Republicans have little trust in social media sites as sources for political and election news. And the most distrusted were 3 giants of the social media landscape: Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Social media is inextricably woven into our lives. In fact, we often use social media for connection. Connection is a relationship between people, things, or ideas. And nowhere can we find greater communication and connection occurring than in the online world today. All of these amazing speakers have talked to you tonight about the wonders of connection. But today, my question is, why do we love connection, but find social media to be manipulative? Ultimately, I would argue that what matters are the motivations behind why we make connections, on social media or otherwise. 3 lessons taught in introductory public speaking courses show us that social media is not alone in its ability to be used for manipulative connection. Outside sources build credibility, story is powerful, and the audience is king. We can look at these 3 lessons through the example of Edward Bernays, who was manipulating the public long before the advent of the internet, much less social uses of it. Lesson 1. Outside sources build credibility. Edward Bernays, the father of modern public relations, lived from 1891 to 1995. He originated the idea of a public relations specialist manipulating the public. Coincidentally, he was also the nephew of none other than Sigmund Freud. When Bernays was hired by the Beechnut Packing Company in order to improve sales of bacon, Bernays responded by using Freud's group psychology to ask, who influences public consumption? The answer? Physicians. Bernays polled physicians and asked them if they recommended a light or a hearty breakfast. They recommended a hearty breakfast, and soon Bernays was able to convince the American public to ditch their toast and tea for bacon and eggs. Now, regardless of how you feel about bacon and eggs, trust me, I love them too, Bernays was unethically manipulating the public not to find what was best for public consumption, but simply to support his own opinion. In contrast, social media provides a powerful source of connectivity today. We can connect with information and even find firsthand sources. Through my desire to connect with people from other countries, I now have a friend in Yemen. Together, we even managed to create a podcast about women in both the United States and Yemen, a podcast I never would have created on my own, thanks to the internet's ability to connect me with outside sources. Edward Bernays, on the other hand, used the sources that he could access in order to manipulate the public. Using outside sources to create credibility only is ethical if not done for manipulative purposes, but instead done out of a genuine desire for the truth. Lesson number 2, stories are powerful. Edward Bernays was hired by the United Fruit Company in order to improve public perception of their work in Guatemala. The United Fruit Company treated its workers terribly. They placed strict rules over entertainment and fiestas, women, justice, and even the cleanliness of workers' homes. Not only did they control the day-to-day lives of their workers, but they also had control over the labor union that was meant to be an independent voice for the people. But the United Fruit Company's power was put in jeopardy when Guatemala's democratically elected president tried to push back against their power. That's when they hired Edward Bernays. Bernays managed to control U.S. reporters' experiences in Guatemala, which led to control of the U.S. news perception of Guatemala, which led to control of the U.S. public's and the government's perception of Guatemala. Through this control, Bernays managed to convince the US government that Guatemala was a communist state. This led to CIA involvement in the toppling of Guatemala's government and a 40-year-long civil war. Through controlling the narrative, Bernays managed to topple an entire government. Guatemala is still unstable to this day. Stories affect how we perceive reality. On the opposite hand, story is being used today, right here in Tennessee, in order to improve patients' lives. Ballad Health has used story and used the online network over the pandemic in order to help improve patients' well-being. A recent study that Ballad Health reported on says that 80% of patients reported a 1 to 7 point drop in pain after a storyteller's visit. A tangible reminder of the power of story in order to improve human existence. Bernays used story to topple a government, and Ballad Health is currently using story in order to improve people's lives. It's clear which use is more ethical. Lesson 3, the audience is king. One of Edward Bernays' most famous campaigns revolved around him controlling women's hopes and desires and manipulating them. Lucky Strike Cigarette Company researched why women didn't smoke, and they discovered that the reason was because there was societal disapproval for it. And in addition, women's tastes didn't match up with the green covering on Lucky Strike's cigarette packaging. So they hired Edward Bernays. And Bernays managed to convince the fashion industry to integrate the same green that was on Lucky Strike's packaging into its fashions and designs. In addition, Bernays staged demonstrations where young women lit up torches of freedom, cigarettes, in order to show support for women's liberation. Bernays managed to convince these women that cigarettes was a symbol of freedom, when instead it was just a bid to make Lucky Strike more money. We all have a fear surrounding social media. It's the same fear my classmates had when they wanted to eliminate social media entirely. We fear that social media is controlling us. It's a similar fear to one held in World War I. At this time, the media was so feared, and the powerful effects of it were so worrying to the American public that it was compared to bullets or hypodermic needles. It sounds similar to our worries about social media today. In fact, the idea of powerful media effects is now superseded by more recent research done by social scientists like Paul Lazarsfeld. This research states that the media has limited effects only. Yes, it can influence us, but that's modified by how we come to the media. Media affects its audience, but it only does so to the extent that we let it, and it only does so to the extent that we come to it with our own personal motivations and desires. Ultimately, you can understand that outside sources build credibility, that story is powerful, and that the audience is king, and be an effective connector. But an effective connector is not necessarily an ethical connector. What matters are the motivations behind why we make connections, not the efficacy of the connections themselves. When I first watched The Social Dilemma, I thought I could see myself reflected in it. And as a media and communications major, I thought there was no way for me to overcome the ethical dilemmas that were inherent in my field. Now, after conversations with my professors, I see things a little differently. After finishing my media and communications projects, I still see myself reflected in a screen. But what I see has changed. I'm a little more poised than freshman year, and hopefully a little wiser, although no taller. And I understand that we need to stop pointing a finger at social media. Instead, we need to turn the mirror on ourselves. What matters are the motivations behind why we build connections. And so I would ask you, what are your motivations? Thank you.